It's straight talk with no chaser. It gives the people a voice, empowers you with a choice. She gives you straight talk, no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. She provides a platform of growth and gives a dying people hope. She gives you straight talk, no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser.
Welcome to the Straight No Chaser Show on intellectualradio.com, an iHeart radio station. This is your host, Rhea Ray Harris, and I'm so glad to be with everyone this evening. Tonight I have a really fun guest. We have a really serious topic, though, Mr. Fred Klonsky, because he is one of my dear high school friends' uncles. And so we've had fun talking about the good old days that we're not going to say how long ago those old days were.
Let's not do that.
But we are really seriously discussing a few things in regards to the education system in Chicago and in Illinois in general. So thank you so much for being a guest on the Straight No Chaser show.
Well, thanks for having me.
I looked at some of the research and I was a little disturbed. So I'm going to give you the questions. I'm going to let you explain to me exactly what is going on.
Well, this is a crazy state, so that may be difficult to do, but we'll try our best.
We'll do the best we can. When we're looking at the state of Illinois not having had a budget for a year, they are also trying to get a formula through the state for funding public school education. What is the issue with the funding process?
The main problem in the funding situation in the state is that we are among the lowest funding states in the United States. We're like in a contest with Mississippi.
Oh, wow.
In terms of how much money the state gives to public education. And when you're in a contest with Mississippi as to who's
like
the worst, this is not the place we want to be. And the reason for this is because the state of Illinois doesn't raise enough money to pay its bills. We have a taxation system in the state where the housemaid at the Hyatt Hotel pays the same rate of taxation on their income as Ken Griffin, who's the richest man in Illinois, probably one of the richest men in the whole United States. Both those people pay exactly the same rate of income tax. And you can't fund the business of the state of Illinois on that kind of taxation system. And so, because you can't, if you need money, taxing poor people is not a solution because, well, poor people don't have any money. So what happens is that most of the school districts in the state, and I'm a retired school teacher. I taught for 30 years, and all of the school systems in Illinois basically fund their schools through local property taxes, unless you're if you're lucky enough to have a casino or a atomic energy plant, something like that. But most towns fund their schools by taxing local property owners. And so if you live in a particularly poor town, town with a large proportion of students of color, you're not going to have much money to pay for your schools. If you live up on the North Shore, if your kids go to New Trier or a place like that, you're able to tax at a fairly high rate. And so how much money you get from the state of Illinois doesn't really matter. So a senator from downstate Illinois by the name of Andy Menard for the last 3 years has tried to come up with a funding bill that changes the formula. Right now, every district outside of Chicago roughly gets the same amount of money from the state based on how many students they have. And so Andy Menard's idea was that they would take money from rich districts, what they would call wealthy districts, and move it to districts that had less money. And on the surface of things, that sounds like a good idea, but it's not, because what they're trying to do is to take this small amount of money, as we said, this among the lowest in the state, and redivide. It's like having a birthday party for your kids. You got a dozen kids coming. One may be a little chubby, one may be a little skinny. But what you're basically doing for the party is you're serving them a cupcake, and you're trying to divide that cupcake up among all these kids. Nobody's getting very much. And instead, what you really need is a big old flat cake from Costco or Jewel or somewhere, So what Menard is doing, he says, look, we can't solve the problem of, especially with this governor, we can't solve the problem of adequate funding. That's just not something we can do now. The governor won't even agree to a budget unless the state is willing to do away with the right of collective bargaining. He has this whole turnaround agenda that's mainly aimed at working people. And he won't sign a budget unless the legislature, the Democratic-controlled legislature, approves these changes in collective bargaining laws and things like that. So Menard says, well, we're not going to solve the adequacy problem, but we can solve the equity problem. So we can redirect some of this money from richer to poor districts. But if there's not enough money, they have to get that money from somewhere.
Okay.
And where are they getting that money? Well, they're getting it by cutting funding to kids with special needs. So a third of the current formula that funds programs to hire special education teachers and paraprofessionals, one-on-one aides that I taught in a school with a large percentage of special needs kids for almost half of my teaching career. And every year we had to go in, the Board of Education would come in and they would cut our assistants, our aides to special ed kids. They would cut them like 6, 10 aides down. And we would spend the first trimester fighting to get those assistants back. And we would win if we got half of them back. And every year we would do this. So every year the number of assistants for special needs kids got reduced. So if you're a poor district, what they want to do is they want to take this money. I don't want to get too complicated in the language of schools because that'll roll everybody's eyes in the back of their heads. But basically, the way it works now in the state of Illinois is that school districts get what's called categorical grants. That means that money has to be spent on kids with special needs. And we're talking about kids with everything from reading disabilities to have what they're called individualized educational plans. So if you have a child, an IEP, so if you have a child with anything from a reading disability to autism, Down syndrome, a physical disability, that money it's a categorical grant. That means it has to be spent on kids with special needs. And what this proposal does to fund this equity deal is to take a third of that money and put it into what they call a block grant. And a block grant means that money goes into the school district's general fund. Maybe they'll spend it on special needs kids,
and maybe
they won't. And we know that these days, if a district is hard up for money, that there's a lot of pressure on them not to take care of the kids with special needs because they're a small proportion of the student body population. There's a small number of parents. They don't have much political power or sway, so they might complain about it, but unless they file a lawsuit or go to court or something like that. So if this money gets moved to what they call a block grant to be used any way the district decides, the most vulnerable students in the districts are going to be hurt because these are the kids with special needs.
Let me ask you a question. When I was young, I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the lottery, the way that part of the way the lottery was sold in Illinois was that it was supposed to subsidize education. But it appears that whatever money is put into the budget from the lottery for education, an equal amount of that money is taken out of the budget for something else.
That's right.
Okay, so I was clear about that.
Oh, you're absolutely clear. This was the biggest scam. This is how they sold it. They said, "Oh, this is money going to go to education," and you say that to voters, and oh, okay, that's a great idea. But you're exactly right. The fact is that the overall budget in the state, the money that the state of Illinois has to spend, we're not only among the lowest taxing states because we have what's called a flat income tax rate. What I was saying before, where
Right.
everybody gets paid at this now at the federal government, they don't do things like that. They at least if theoretically, if you make more money, you pay a higher rate of taxation than if you're a working person. That's a graduated income tax. The more you make,
the more
higher,
you pay.
the higher percentage of what you pay. But in Illinois, it's a flat tax. Everybody pays the same percentage. So there's simply not enough money, even if they had a budget. There hasn't been enough money to pay their bills. Even when Quinn was governor, they couldn't pay. They didn't payment to hospitals, and they were running 6 months, sometimes a year late on paying their bills because not only don't we tax enough. This is what people kind of raise their eyebrows when I say this. We don't spend enough. We don't spend enough on the fundamental needs of the people of Illinois when it comes to healthcare and social service agencies and all the things that the state instead of Rahm Emanuel building expensive athletic arenas for DePaul University or trying to get a Star Wars museum on the lakefront. Instead of spending money on stuff like that, I gotta watch my language, right? On stuff like that, they should be spending money on services to the people in the state who need help. And we just don't have enough. As long as we have a taxation system like this, we don't have enough money to spend. So we don't spend enough, and we don't tax enough, especially taxing the rich who can afford to have their.
Chip in a little bit more.
Well, you take Ken. So here's Ken. So we're facing a crisis in Chicago, a budget crisis in Chicago, where at bet where it's $1 billion in deficit, they need a $500 million to open. They're going to fire 5,000 teachers next year in CPS if they can't find 5,000 teachers. This is a destruction of the.
Did you understand that? 5,000 teachers out of how many?
5,000 teachers.
How many teachers does Chicago public school system have?
About 30,000. Yeah, you got it right. You got it right. So if they don't come to some kind of resolution of finding money for Chicago, and even in Andy Menard's bill, the bill we were just talking about, this is Senate Bill 231, even if that were to pass, as it is now, Chicago would get roughly $200 million for expenses and then money to pay into the pension system.
But
that's not small potatoes. I mean,
no.
$200 million would mean a couple thousand teacher jobs. So that's not nothing. But it doesn't begin to solve.
But you said $1 billion.
But so the CPS is $1 billion in liabilities, and Ken Griffin, the richest man in Illinois, he just sold or bought. I can never remember whether he sold them or bought them, but it doesn't really matter for the point because this was $500 million for 2 paintings that either sold or he bought, whatever it is. So his little art deal could save 5,000 teacher jobs. That's how crazy things are in Illinois when it comes to money.
And when we come back on the Straight No Chaser show, we're going to discuss the Pay for Success social impact bond.
Let's do that. It doesn't sound sexy, but it's interesting.
On the Straight No Chaser show on intellectualradio.com. Okay.
At glamconference.net. Don't miss a day of inspiration at the 2016 Glam Conference, Saturday, June 11th at the Skokie Banquet and Conference Center. Hear from keynote speaker Karen Jordan of ABC7 and a host of other coaches and successful businesswomen. Adult tickets are $85 and just $49 for teen girls aged 14 to 18. Your teens will learn about college prep and social media etiquette while you enjoy the Glam Walk fashion show and the men's panel discuss dating, relationships, and more. Saturday, June 11th, don't miss GLAM, the Goals, Life, and Money Conference. Limited space available. Be glamorous and register today at glamconference.net.
And we're back on the Straight No Chaser show on intellectualradio.com and iHeart Radio Station. My guest, Fred Klonsky, and I are discussing the serious matter of the Chicago public school system and funding in Illinois. So let's talk about what something else that's floating out here that most people don't know anything about, which is the Pay for Success social impact bonds.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's no way they would know. Here's what's funny. You asked me to be on the show. I'm a retired kindergarten through fifth grade art teacher. I'm retired for 4 years. This is not what I love being here with you. This is a great show you have, and I'm pleased to come. But I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm retired, and the idea that I would know about social impact bonds or Pay for Success or tax systems in the state of Illinois, this is crazy. But things have gotten so bad in Illinois that people like me, who I'm supposed to be lying on a beach somewhere, walking my dog, having coffee at a cafe up in Logan Square, that's where I live, and instead I'm spending my time reading about tax systems and social impact bonds. So, but that just shows you what a bizarre world we've come to live in these days. So,
what exactly is it?
So, I'll tell you. So, here's what it is. What these brilliant investment bankers on Wall Street, after they got done nearly driving the American economic system into the ground, they came back and they said, we're going to make money off of how many kids we can keep out of special education. That's the deal.
How do you do that?
So someone like Goldman Sachs, right, one of those who was responsible for the economic collapse of 2008, they basically came up with bonds that you can buy, that investors can buy and sell on Wall Street. That is funding. In the case of Chicago, they're funding the early childhood education program in Chicago that Rahm made a splash about having. And that money is coming from investors on Wall Street. And the way they make money, the way the investors make money off of investing in an early childhood program, is that they get a return on their investment for every child that doesn't get referred to services for special education students. They look at that as a success. In other words, if you have for every 100 kids, and this is what they've done. This is in Catalyst, which is a publication that kind of follows what goes on in the Chicago public schools. This is the first year that they've run this. It's called Pay for Success, and what they found is that they reduced the number of students referred to special education services by 47%. In Utah, where they did this, they reduced it by 91%. Now, somebody walking by here on the street might say, well, that's good, right? We got less kids going into, except
what if they need them?
That's exact. If you're judging your success rate on how many, and you're getting money, you're going to get a return on your investment for how many kids don't get identified. There's a profit incentive not to identify students. The special ed students are a category of students. They're like girls, or they're like,
right.
It's not. Sometimes you can move them out of special ed. Sometimes you can't. It's not a failure if you can't. Sometimes that's
it just is.
It just is. And so you don't measure your success by you measure your success by how many students get what they need, not how many don't get identified. Those are two different ways in which you look at special education. And I taught special ed kids for years and years, and I would never look at what their situation is. Sometimes it's not something you cure. It is just who they are. But they've turned this into a profit-driven system where you actually make money by denying kids the services that they require. And this is really part of education is a big money deal. I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars, and to have it in the public sector, to be owned by you and me and the citizens as a whole, that's kind of the democratic way we've always looked at schools. But there's a lot of money in schools, and there's money that can be made if you're in the private sector and you're looking at ways of making money. What our public schools are it's a big bucket of money just sitting there, and they're always coming up with that's charter schools and vouchers and now Pay for Success. These are all schemes that they've come up with to try and make money off of something that should be really held in the common good. That's always been the tradition in American schools, is that this is one of those places where you just you're not supposed to make money.
Profit-driven entity.
It's not a profit-driven. It should not be.
Well, now it is.
And now it is.
Well, when we come back on the Straight No Chaser show, we're going to have our money moment, and then we're going to discuss two more things. For the parents that are unfamiliar, what are the different classifications of schools, especially in the Chicago area, and what is the failure of the Chicago public school system? We'll be back on the Straight No Chaser show on intellectualradio.com and iHeart Radio station.
Greetings, Rear Ray and my Straight No Chaser family. It is your main man, H. Cortez, the one and only financial health mentor to the working class, coming to you with tonight's Money Moment. Tonight, we're going to continue our 8-part series titled Cash Flow Mastery, the 8 things you need for financial success. We're on part 2, but let me recap part 1 before we go any further. Part 1, we talked about the importance of cash flow mastery. I mean, taking complete advantage of the cash that is flowing into your house, but in particular, the cash that's flowing away from you, and being very certain that you have a destination for every dollar that leaves your hand. Once you get control of your taxes, once you start eliminating your debt, minimizing your expenses, you will find yourself at the end of the month with more money left over. So the question becomes, what do you do with it? All right. Step number 2. You want to create what we call a mini emergency fund, right? If you're not familiar with what an emergency fund is, that is basically 12 to 18 months of your monthly living expenses put to the side. So if you lose your job or you run into some sort of catastrophe, you can sustain yourself for 12 to 18 months without batting an eye, without down, till you get back on your feet. A mini emergency fund is $2,000 to $3,000 so that your plan for financial success will not get disrupted in the event that the AC goes out in the house, the car breaks down, and you need some money to get it back rolling so you can continue to have transportation to and from work. Those sorts of things are what can really derail a financial success plan, because what most people tend to do in those situations is have to turn to some sort of payday lending institution, will have to overdraw their account in some shape, form, or fashion. But if you have that mini emergency fund set up, then you are covered. We recommend that you put that mini emergency fund in a municipal bond fund, because you're going to earn more interest than you would if you just had it in a bank account or a regular money market account. So guys, your mini emergency fund and build that $2,000 to $3,000 up so that you cover yourself and don't have to panic or financial success plan in the event something happens, like the car breaks down. I'm your boy, H. Cortez, financial health mentor to the working class. You're checking out the Straight No Chaser show with my girl, Rhea Ray, as your host. And until I talk to you guys next week, get your money up, because you can do it. Peace.
And that was H. Cortez with our weekly money moment. That's part 2 of an 8-part series, getting people together to have their funding right, because that's another problem that we'll discuss at another time. But today we're here with Fred Klonsky talking about the school system in the Chicagoland area and in Illinois. Before we go any further, for people that really don't know and don't understand the system, what is the difference between the charter schools, the regular quote-unquote neighborhood public schools, the magnet schools, the selective enrollment? There's so many things that are going here. Yeah. Can we briefly explain what they are?
Well, sure. The neighborhood public school is what we know. I was telling you before, I moved here from, I came to Chicago in 1973. My neighborhood, the one I lived over on Augusta and Austin, and there was a neighborhood high school and a neighborhood elementary school, and I was saying every neighborhood. This is in '73. Every neighborhood, a church, and a bar, and a factory to work in, and a school. Now there are areas, say, of West Humboldt Park, 4 square miles where there's not a neighborhood school. There's not a neighborhood school. So because Rahm and Daley before him basically closed. Well, Rahm closed 50 of them at one. The most schools. He did more damage to schools with African American students attending than he closed more college closed. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So 50 schools at one time. No one ever did that before, and these are all schools that were in African American neighborhoods. These are neighborhood schools. So now there's no neighborhood schools are a thing of the past. The churches are half empty. The bars are still there, and the factories are gone, and the workers who worked in those factories are gone. Mostly African Americans who came during the Great Migration north, because there were jobs and good-paying union jobs to work in. Like I said, Chicago in the old days, there was plenty wrong, but there was work. There was work, and people could work at a living wage and send their kids to a neighborhood school. What charter schools are? These are schools that are paid for by the Chicago public school system, but are run by essentially private. They're not answerable to anybody. They don't have to provide.
Are not in the union, are they?
Well, they can be. There's, in fact, among those teachers to unionize, and a number of them have a special separate, but they can't. They're not allowed to join the local that the Chicago public school teachers are part of. Karen Lewis is not. They can be in a union, but not with Karen Lewis, and they don't work under the same contract that the teachers in a neighborhood public school. So, and oftentimes they'll build these schools right across the street from a perfectly good. And we were talking before about how many of our schools now, because of the fact that our city has been, I don't want to say ethnically cleansed, but it's certainly people of color have that's probably a little too upset people. But that's really what's gone on, is that the city's been the fastest growing neighborhood in Chicago is downtown, is in the Loop, and wealthy, expensive, and the neighborhoods are being decimated. And added to all the problems in the neighborhoods, public school buildings that are simply boarded up, and there's nothing that helps the neighborhood worse than having a huge empty building that's been boarded up. So charter schools they're not private because on the one hand they're not private because
they're not tuition based,
because they're paid for with money that comes out of the CPS budget. But the rules are different. Teachers aren't there's no limits on how many hours they can work or what they can do. None of everybody else that we've bargained for years don't. And they're run by oftentimes by management firms that have the heads of these now, because charter started out as small, kind of independent, almost like mom and pop operations, and now they're run by giant national management firms where the heads of them are making $300,000 and $400,000 and $500,000.
I was about to ask, what is the motivation to run a charter school?
Money. money. That's what I'm saying about school systems are really billion-dollar operations, and people want it's just like teacher pensions. This is a big pot of money, and it's like they asked there was that famous story of the Chicago bank robber. They said, "Why do you rob banks?" And he says, "Well, that's where the money is." So that's the motivation. It's to go for the money.
Now, for high school, Jennifer and I went to Whitney Young Magnet, and at the time we didn't understand the significance of the word magnet.
Mm-hmm.
We just went to school.
Mm-hmm. Now
I understand that there was a really big significance to that compared to Crane High School, which was down the street. We were on the same bus route on the 126 Jackson, and they were always so hostile towards us, and we didn't know why at the time. Now I have a little more clear vision as to why. Because they thought that the parents were told that Whitney Young's building was going to be the new Crane, allegedly.
That's right.
And then when it not only became a magnet school, but a magnet school where almost 95% of the population did not come from that community, it created a situation. But for the lay person that doesn't know, magnet schools are basically tester schools that take, firstly, you have to qualify to take the test,
right,
which means you have to be in the top, 5% of students in Chicago about?
Well, it used to be when we were talking before, I have a 40 and a 40-year-old daughter who both went to Whitney Young. And and these are selective admission high schools like Walter Payton and Northside Prep and places like that. You have to pass a test. But in the old days, when they were first opened, there was a good side to them, and the good side was that they came out of a lawsuit against the Chicago Public Schools that said that the schools were, as they were and remain segregated. And part of the establishment of these magnet schools was as a result of the desegregation decision by the courts. And they said that in order to provide equal education,
right?
But it really did. We would have quotas, and so a certain number of students of color had to attend. They had to be admitted to Whitney Young, and a certain number of white students. Of course, by that time, there was only 20% of the CPS that had white students in it. And so if you were, we used to joke, if you were breathing in white, you could get into Whitney Young. There wasn't because they didn't have enough students to meet the white quota anyway. The competition was among black students and Latino students. But still, the aspect of them was that it brought kids from different neighborhoods together.
Sure.
And so that had a value. But over time, they did away with the desegregation order. That's not in place any longer, and those magnet schools have become have less students of color attending them, and they really become schools of privilege. So you have the situation where the governor, the current governor, who lived up up on the North Shore and could have sent his kid to New Trier, bought a condo in River North so that his daughter could attend Walter Payton. And when she didn't even pass the test to get into Walter Payton, he went to Arnie Duncan, who was the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools at the time,
yes,
and said, "Arnie, can you get my kid into Walter Payton?" And he said, "Bruce, no problem." Wow. And so she got admitted. They did what they called a clout admission. And people in Chicago, we all know how clout works, So
because there are a percentage of children that are selected by the principals.
They have set asides for friends of Arnie and friends of the principal. So that's the problem, is that in any kind of just and humane system, we would provide a good school, we wouldn't need magnet schools or charter schools or special schools of any kind. We would provide a good quality neighborhood school for anyone who wanted to attend, and then we would provide the services to those students who, for whatever reason, suffer from a physical disability or have a reading, whatever those things are, that we would provide the services to those students. This idea that we have tiers, that we have Category 1 schools and Category 3 schools in a democratic system is really, it's just not right.
Well, I'll use myself as an example. Like I said, I didn't realize what was happening until it had already happened, until I was grown.
Yeah.
And I went back to my mother, and we grew up in the neighborhood where Bowen was our neighborhood high school. And only 2 children off the block at that time went to Bowen out of like maybe 20. We went to Kenwood, we went to Whitney Young, we went to Lincoln Park, a couple of parochial and private schools, some Hyde Park students. But no one but 2 children from the same family went to Bowen.
Well, there was a time you weren't welcome at Bowen.
At that time, it was still iffy, but you could make it.
Yeah.
This was in the 80s. And I asked my mother later, would it have been better? Would Bowen have been a better school if all of us who went everywhere else had to have gone to Bowen? And she said, yes, but at the time, no one's parent was willing to take the risk.
That's right.
And so we wound up decimating the neighborhood school by going even to Lindblom, which was way far away from where we were, and Whitney Young was too, so that Bowen, the children that were left in Bowen, were considered the quote unquote financially impoverished and who did not have either the scores or the parental knowledge to get them somewhere else.
That's exactly, and that's still the case today. I mean, my neighborhood school, Darwin Elementary School, that's where my kids went. It's a 95% low-income school, but it's a tier 1 school. This is a school that provides a good quality, good teachers, good environment. Like every school, there's issues, between the teachers and administration and all that. But this is a building that can hold 1,100 students. It's old Chicago. It's a 100-year-old Chicago public school, and it's actually quite a beautiful school. When you go inside, it's been well maintained. It's old, but I'm old, and I'm still doing. I'm well maintained, at least for the time. Just because you're old doesn't, And but so it could hold 1,100 kids. There are 500 kids that are enrolled in that school, but 150 kids show up every morning out in front of that school to be picked up by a bus to be taken to a school outside our neighborhood. That's how crazy this system is, because it's I've lived there for 45 years, but this is a neighborhood in transition, right? So you have young, I don't know what you call them, millennials. Is that the term now?
Yes.
You know, so anyway, yeah, and they're just starting to have kids, and it's a little tough to buy something out of the city now, you know, so they bought a house in Logan Square, but they don't want to send their kids to the neighborhood school. They're going to send them to a charter school or to a school 3 miles away, put their kids on a bus and send their kids 3 miles away, when there ought to be, and there is actually, a good quality neighborhood school. So the question of racism, and race is an issue here. There's a tension. I mean, I talked to good parents who want to send their kids to neighborhood school. They say, you know, I want a diverse student body. Of course, you have kids, you know, parents of kids who have been sending their kids for siblings, you know, for 15, 20 years. They're not so much looking for diversity. They just want to make sure that their school provides a good quality education. So there's all these tensions that exist in the city, and some history of racism and tension, but some of it is provoked. And I think for example, when Rahm first set out his list of school closures, it was a list of 300 schools. And so the first thing, I mean, you just know what was going to happen. Neighborhoods were going to start circling the wagons and say, take their school, not my school. And some of us raised a slogan, every Chicago public school is our school. But you could understand why parents would do that. It's their kids after, like you say, they don't want to take a risk. They don't want to put their kids at harm. Their kids are the most important thing to them. And so, but Rahm he was a clever man. And so to put out a list of 300 schools, immediately people started fighting each other and started raising all kinds of concerns. And then he said, okay, we'll take some of the schools off the list. And that left more parents to fight over which schools would stay open. And finally, he reduced it to 50. But that was a disastrous move for the kids who went to those, who now have to walk in so-called safe passage zone. Imagine a city in which you have to have guards so that your kids can.
And you're still not actually safe, because they shoot in the safe passage zone.
And they're sure not safe.
My parents retired in the 90s. My mother in the big buyout in 93, 94, my father in 99. And both of them talked about having started teaching here in the mid 60s, how things had changed, not just with the student population and not just with the parents of the students, but with like I said, there's always going to be a little battle sometimes between the educators and the administration, but how hostile the work environment had come, in particular for my mother. My father just kind of zoned out on that part. He just focused on the children. But I think one of the biggest failures that Chicago has with its public school system is driving out the true teachers. And by that, I mean, there are people that are coming here because it's a paycheck, and there are people that are coming here because they love to teach children. And there's a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And so my son, who has been out of the system now since 2013, when I look back on all the teachers he had, I can only recall literally maybe 4 that I thought were actually real teachers. And that's even in high school, they're changing teachers every period, because most of them at that point were either so burned out and angry dealing with the administrative craziness, or they weren't teachers to start. Is that one of the failures of Chicago, or is that a national trend? Is that local, or is that national?
Well, here's what the national trend is, and really has been for quite a while, that can't retain enough teachers, so that it took me, I would say, 5 years before I even, as teaching in the classroom, before I even knew what the right questions to ask were. Let alone, I mean, not only didn't I know what the answers were, it took me 5 years to know what the questions were. The way you find out that is by working with veteran teachers who've been, like your folks, who have been in the system, who've been teaching kids for 25 and 30 years and longer. To have an environment where you have young teachers and old and veteran. I don't say old teachers because everyone gets mad at me when I call them old, but since I am one, I can say old. But where you have in terms of age and experience, a diverse faculty and a diverse staff of experience. Because the only way really you can get experience, I mean, you can have all the great education programs and I went to a good one. I was at the University of Illinois Chicago, and it was a great experience for me. it in no way prepared me for standing in front of a group of 30 fourth graders. I mean, and in fact, one of the reasons I finally retired, I still love teaching. It was just my back. I couldn't do it physically. I've worked in factories and done all kinds. I've never been as tired as I am at the end of the day of teaching. I was falling asleep at 8:30, but so you want to have a diverse faculty. But there's nothing in the public school systems now that encourage collaboration among teachers, where the source of the decision making about what counts as a quality curriculum, of what should be taught and how it should be taught, it's all prescribed. Teachers are literally getting binders where they have to be on page. They're expected. The principal walks in, they want to know you're on page 32, the same as page 32 as every other teacher. It doesn't matter what questions the kids have or what you have a test. You have to test to prepare them for. The Park test here in Illinois. So you have a standardized test you have to prepare them for. We don't have time to be answering. Some student asks a really interesting question that they want, and so to be able to manage that. You talk about burnout. That's exactly what's happening. I know a lot of you. When the teachers went out on strike in CPS in 2012, and I was downtown, I was supporting because I'm a union man, and I was shocked to see a couple of things that I saw. One was that overwhelmingly the teaching core in CPS, which was 70% African American back in the day when you were there, is now below 20%.
Wow.
So you have, it's not that I don't think white teachers can teach. They can't. I don't believe that white teachers can't teach children of color. I certainly don't believe Latino teachers. But I don't think that that's good. I think there's a crisis in the country, not only a crisis of retaining teachers more than 5 years. That's half of teachers leave the teaching profession within 5 years. But there's even a larger crisis among African American teachers. And your parents, one of the reasons they're going after teacher pensions is because those, when it was 70% African American teachers teaching in CPS, and those teachers are retired now, these are African American women who are collecting pensions. And so if you want to know why they want to go after teacher pensions, that's who they're going after.
What do we do to fix this? What do we do to make this better?
Well, I'm not a magician. I don't know. People ask me that. They say, well, what are we supposed to do? And here's what I know. I've been an activist my whole life, going all the way back to my college days. And and one of the things I've learned about getting older is that there's no blueprint and there's no roadmap. I just know when there's a problem, you got to fight it. And it's got to be, you got to fight it wherever you can fight it. You fight it in the legislature, you fight it in the streets. I think one of the great things unique about Chicago is that we have a movement of young people, some of it coming out of Black Lives Matter, some of it from other sources. They're not being sidetracked by elections. And I'm for elections. I got my candidates I support, but there's a street movement in Chicago, and I think that's where this will be saved, is by young people, as it always has, right? It's always been the young folks who have taken to the streets and changed things. And I don't have I don't have a roadmap for it, but I believe that's where it'll come from.
We have to look at the funding sources, people. Yeah. We have to start making demands about where is that lottery money. I'm still on that lottery money. We have to look at what we can do to help the teachers actually teach.
Yes. But about the money, the main thing is that we need a constitutional amendment in Illinois that will change the taxing system from that flat tax we were talking about into a graduated income tax. It doesn't require Bruce Rauner's signature. It goes on the ballot. It requires a supermajority of voters to approve it. But we have a democratically controlled state Senate and House, and we should hold them accountable to pass a constitutional amendment to be voted on that will change the way in which we stop letting the rich get off the hook on what they owe, on their fair share. Stop putting the burden of taxation on those least able to pay. We should do away with the kind of sales taxes on the things that all of us need, like milk and eggs, and start taxing luxury items that the rich spend their money on. We should have a tax policy in this state that goes after those who have money and stop putting the burden on those of us who don't.
And have us stop fighting with Mississippi to be the worst funded.
Yeah, let's get out of
system.
that race. The race to the bottom. They used to call it a race to the top. Arnie called this thing a race to the top. But really, what we're in is a race to the bottom. And Illinois is way out in the lead on that. And
we have to make up our minds that our neighborhood school systems are worth saving.
You got that right.
And with that, Fred Klonsky, I thank you so much for being a guest on the Straight No Chaser show.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're going to have to talk again because we're going to talk about this money, this state money, this state money, this state money.
Yeah, well, it'll be a topic for a while, I think.
Oh yes, because they're only going to have 9 more days in session.
That's it.
And we still may not have a budget, right?
Well, there's some who say we're never going to get as long as Ron is governor, we're never going to get a budget.
We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, that tuned in tonight to the Straight No Chaser show. This is your host, Rhea Ray Harris, and I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. As always, dedicate yourselves to the truth, no matter the cost. Be safe, everyone.
It's straight talk with no chaser. Gives the people a voice, empowers you with a choice. She gives you straight talk, no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. She provides a platform of growth and gives the dying people hope. She gives you straight talk, no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser. Straight talk with no chaser.